I want to play a little bit of Biden's remarks on the economy that he just gave, and we'll go through parts of what he's discussing in terms of this new executive order.
Because our successful vaccination program strategy has been working and the immediate relief through the American Rescue Plan has brought back our economy from the worst economic crisis in nearly a century, America is now on track. We're now on track for the highest economic growth in 40 years and among the highest growth records on record. We designed our economic strategy to be durable to the ups and downs that come with recovery. There are ups and downs. That's why the American Rescue Plan was designed to help people not just all at once, but over the course of a full year, so we could continue supporting families, small businesses, state and local budgets to help them weather those ups and downs. And now that the economy is back on track, we're making progress on the second phase of our strategy, ensuring long-term growth. That's what my Build Back Better agenda, including my Americans Family Plan and the bipartisan infrastructure agreement we reached last month, that's what they're all about, long term. But to keep our country moving, we have to take another step as well. And I know you're all tired of hearing me during the campaign and since I've elected president, talk about it. And that's bringing fair competition back to the economy. That's why today I'm going to be signing shortly an executive order promoting competition to lower prices, to increase wages, and to take another critical step toward an economy that works for everybody. The heart of American capitalism is a simple idea: open and fair competition. That means that if your companies want to win your business, they have to go out and they have to up their game. Better prices and services, new ideas and products. That competition keeps the economy moving and keeps it growing. Fair competition is why capitalism has been the world's greatest force of prosperity and growth. By the same token, competitive economy means companies must do everything they do to compete for workers, offering higher wages, more flexible hours, better benefits. But what we've seen over the past few decades is less competition and more concentration that holds our economy back. We see it in big agriculture, in big tech, in big pharma. The list goes on. Rather than competing for consumers, they are consuming their competitors. Rather than competing for workers, they're finding ways to gain the upper hand on labor. And too often, the government has actually made it harder for new companies to break in and compete. Look at what that means for family budgets. Take prescription drugs. Just a handful of companies control the market for many vital medicines, giving them leverage over everyone else to charge whatever they want. As a result, Americans pay 2.5 times more for prescription drugs than in any other leading country. And nearly 1 in 4 Americans struggles to afford their medication. Another example, hearing aids. Right now, if you need a hearing aid, you can't just walk into a pharmacy and pick one up over the counter. You have to get it from a doctor or a specialist. Not only does that make getting hearing aids inconvenient, it makes them considerably more expensive. And it makes it harder for new companies to compete, innovate, and sell hearing aids at lower prices. As a result, a pair of hearing aids can cost thousands of dollars. That's a big reason why just 1 in 7 Americans with hearing loss actually use a hearing aid. Another example, internet services. There are more than 65 million Americans live in a place with only one high-speed internet provider. Research shows when you have a limited internet operation, you pay up to 5 times more on average than families in places with more choices. That's what a lack of competition does. It raises the prices you pay. It's not just consumers getting hurt. Big ag is putting a squeeze on farmers. Small and family farms, first-time farmers, like veterans coming home and Black and Latino and indigenous farmers, they're seeing price hikes for seed, lopsided contracts, shrinking profits, and growing debt. Lack of competition hurts workers as well. In many communities, there are only a handful of employers left competing for workers. Think of company towns across Appalachia and other parts of the country where one big corporation runs the show. When corporations have that kind of leverage over workers, it pushes down advertised wages by up to 17%. And as competition decreases, businesses don't feel the pressure to innovate or invest in their workforce. That hurts working families and hurts our economy. All told, between rising prices and lowering wages, lack of competition costs the median American household $5,000 a year. Well, look, I'm a proud capitalist. I spent most of my career representing the corporate state of Delaware. I know America can't succeed unless American business succeeds. But let me be very clear. Capitalism without competition isn't capitalism. It's exploitation. Without healthy competition, big players can change and charge whatever they want and treat you however they want. And for too many Americans, that means accepting a bad deal for things that you can't go without. So, we know we've got a problem, a major problem, but we also have an incredible opportunity. We can bring back more competition to more of the country, helping entrepreneurs and small businesses get in the game, helping workers get a better deal, helping families save money every month. Good news is we've done it before. In the early 1900s, President Teddy Roosevelt saw an economy dominated by giants like Standard Oil and J.P. Morgan's railroads. He took them on, and he won. And he gave the little guy a fighting chance. Decades later, during the Great Depression, his cousin Franklin Roosevelt saw a wave of corporate mergers that wiped out scores of small businesses, crushing competition and innovation. So he ramped up antitrust enforcement eightfold in just 2 years, saving families billions in today's dollars and helping set the course for sustained economic growth after World War II. He also called for an economic Bill of Rights, including, quote, the right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies, end of quote. Between them, the two Roosevelts established an American tradition, an antitrust tradition.
Somebody fixed
It's how we ensure that our economy isn't about people.
That was, by the way, not an audio thing on my end. Somebody switched mics on the NBC feed on this because they recognized how quiet it was, and somebody flipped on, I'm going to guess, the 48 booster on there.
For capitalism, it's about capitalism working for people. But over time, we've lost the fundamental American idea that true capitalism depends on fair and open competition. 40 years ago, we chose the wrong path, in my view, following the misguided philosophy of people like Robert Bork and pulled back on enforcing laws to promote competition. We are now 40 years into the experiment of letting giant corporations accumulate more and more power. And what have we gotten from it? Less growth, weakened investment, fewer small businesses. Too many Americans who feel left behind. Too many people who are poorer than their parents. I believe the experiment failed. We have to get back to an economy that grows from the bottom up and the middle out. The executive order I'm soon going to be signing commits the federal government to full and aggressive enforcement of our antitrust laws. No more tolerance for abusive actions by monopolies. No more bad mergers that lead to mass layoffs, higher prices, fewer options for workers and consumers alike. My executive order includes 72 specific actions. I expect the federal agencies, and they know this, to help restore competition so that we have lower prices, higher wages, more money, more options, and more convenience for the American people. Today, I want to focus on 3 specific actions. First,
before he gets into those, I want to touch on some of these things before we get to the break, because we won't be able to play all 3 of them during this segment before we get to the, we got to take a break in a couple minutes. What you're hearing in this speech in particular is not dissimilar from things that you've heard in varying degrees of jargon from both, or I guess all three aisles of the political spectrum in terms of a need and a problem that exists in the economic structure of the United States. Now, there are still some, Reaganite trickle-down holdouts, I'm sure, out there that will, scream bloody murder about this. And I don't find that it will be that different from everybody who was sort of shouting at Biden yesterday when he announced that we are going to have all of our troops out of Afghanistan by August, and that a good portion of the people that we need to evacuate who helped us are going to be moved to Guam and other places temporarily, South Asian countries specifically. They're not listing or telling where those people are going to be sent so that nothing bad happens to them. But after he made the announcement that this was what was going to happen, the response from the reporters was, in many ways, the same questions that would be asked no matter when you came out. If this had happened 10 years ago, when we were only halfway through the commitment we put in Afghanistan, 10 days ago, or 5 years from now, the questions would always be the same about this particular circumstance. There was no variance in this. There is no, only 6 more months, just 5 more days, just 20 more months, just another year, whatever that was, is not going to materially change the circumstance in Afghanistan in a way that warrants U.S. troops being there anymore. And Biden's recognition of that and his decision, by the way, to get everybody out by September 11th, which he is already ahead of. Again, this is a lot of these dates. We're way ahead on this. Well, we got to take a break. When we come back, I want to listen to the 3 parts that he makes on this, that he breaks down in this particular system, and just to hear the joy of him going, number 1, number 2, number 3. We'll be back right after this. I'm Hal Sparks. I'm filling in for Joan Esposito this lovely Friday. She'll be back next week. And, of course, I'll be live streaming my regular show after this. It's a big Gab day for me, as it were. Gab Fest, as it were. Not the site Gab, me. Okay, we'll be back. We're continuing listening to Biden's remarks today on the executive order he just signed on competition, heightened competition in the economy, as well as a couple of little additions, like being able to buy over-the-counter hearing aids, which is extraordinary. That this is just happening now. This is just happening now. Then, okay, just now. So many of these things that Biden is mentioning absolutely positively could have happened during the Trump era, and these are all things that Trump patted himself on the back for handling and never touched.
The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, we're going to work with states and tribes to safely import prescription drugs from Canada. That's just one of many actions in the executive order that will lower prescription drug prices. Second, the FDA is going to issue rules so that hearing aids can be sold over the counter. That's something the last administration was supposed to have done but didn't do. We're going to
exactly. A lot of lip.
Done. After these rules go into effect, a pair of hearing aids could cost hundreds of dollars, not thousands. And you'll be able to pick them up at your local drugstore. Third, we're going to improve competition for workers. I've talked a lot about non-compete agreements.
The audio on this is vacillating. This is NBC's.
Contracts that say you can't take another job in your field even if you get a better deal. I made a speech, I was just reminiscing with my staff, back in 2018 at the Brookings Institution, where I talked about the non-compete clauses that were just, I found to be absolutely ridiculous, but how prevalent they were throughout industries. At least 1 in 3 businesses.
It's so quiet. What happened to the audio feed on?
Their work.
Hold on. I'm going to find another source for this real quick, just because it's driving me nuts personally, as far as the audio on that. He goes on to talk about the sort of the value of and sort of the odd experience of people who. Well, I'll let him say it actually, but let me see Biden speech economy executive order. I'll just look that up. let's see if I can find another source for that that has actually good audio. We'll try this guy right here.
Remain in a one.
Hey, that sounds much louder. Here we go. Hopefully this will pick it up. Yeah. Oh, wait. Nope, that's from January. My bad. There's so many of them. There we go. Okay, so here we go. This is the Yahoo News version.
In long-term.
Here we go. Hopefully this will...
So that we have lower prices, higher wages, more money, more options, and more convenience for the American people. Today, I want to focus on 3 specific actions.
Hopefully this will cover a little bit of the same ground, but just for clarity.
The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. We're going to work with states and tribes to safely import prescription drugs from Canada. That's just one of many actions in the executive order that will lower prescription drug prices. Second, the FDA is going to issue rules so that hearing aids can be sold over the counter. That's something the last administration was supposed to have done but didn't do. We're going to get...
By the way, in case anybody's wondering, if what he was proposing was socialism, we would have a factory created by the government to produce said hearing aids, and they would be handed out, and certain people would have to be chosen at random because of how they tested in school to go make said hearing aids. Just for the record. So, because there's people in the chat room on Yahoo News under this going, who thinks this guy's actually a capitalist? Yeah.
After these rules go into effect, a pair of hearing aids could cost hundreds of dollars, not thousands. And you'll be able to pick them up at your local drugstore. Third, we're going to improve competition for workers.
Oh, I see.
I've talked a lot about non-compete agreements, contracts that say you can't take another job in your field even if you get a better deal. I made a speech, I was just reminiscing with my staff, back in 2018 at the Brookings Institution, where I talked about the non-compete clauses that were just, I found to be absolutely ridiculous, but how prevalent they were throughout industries. At least 1 in 3 businesses require their workers to sign a non-compete agreement. These aren't just high-paid executives or scientists who hold secret formulas for Coca-Cola so Pepsi can't get their hands on it. The recent study found 1 in 5 workers without a college education is subject to non-compete agreements. They're construction workers, hotel workers, disproportionately women and women of color. Think of the 26-year-old employee at a company. She's a star worker, but she isn't being treated right. She's underpaid, passed over for promotions. Competitor across the street knows it, but wants to bring her in at a higher wage, but she can't do it. Her company threatens legal action over a non-complete clause she had to sign in order to get hired in the first place. She can't afford a lawyer for help, so she's locked in. Imagine if you're in her shoes. You'd feel powerless, disrespected.
By the way, there was, on a side note, anybody who remembers the old Netscape storyline from years ago knows that there's also a predatory aspect to this where there were programming companies, that were like gaming companies that were having their employees, because they hadn't signed a non-competition clause or something with their programmers, they were having their programmers sniped. The company that sniped them would make them sign a 5-year non-competition clause, hold them, which was, it didn't matter if they stayed on as an employee. If you quit or you're fired, you still can't work at that company for 5 years. They would hire people on for a couple of months, fire them intentionally just so they could not work at the other company, just to undermine it, taking people away from that company just so that, and basically making these a permanent unemployed class of programmers that would have gone to work for this other company, would not have been getting state or federal unemployment benefits or the like. They would have just gone and gotten another job, but literally they could not. This has been something that's been around for a long time in the programming and tech world, and it's amazing that it also applies to McDonald's. weird.
Trapped. That's not right. Workers should be free to take a better job if someone offers it. If your employer wants to keep you, he or she should have to make it worth your while to stay. That's the kind of competition that leads to better wages and greater dignity of work.
Sorry, the audio clipping on this is from the source, not from our end, and I apologize for that. But it kind of makes it sound like a speech from the 40s.
Look, I'm not going to go into it now, but I used to, there's non-compete clauses or people running the machines that lay down asphalt. If in fact you get offered a job and you have you're in Arkansas doing it.
Literally, someone is jiggling a cable right now.
A lot of specific examples. You can't take a job in West Texas to do it. What in the hell?
But for the top of by the way, for the top of that, just so you know, he was saying if you're laying asphalt in Arkansas and you want to take a job in West Texas, you want to move, I mean, for any number of reasons, and you just want to get the same job you had in Arkansas in West Texas, you can't. So let's say somebody has an illness and you want to move closer to your family because that's where you're from, but you moved where the job was, you can't move back because you can't get a job. That kind of lack of mobility in the economy is bizarre.
You can't take a job in West Texas to do it. What in the hell does that have to do with anything? No, I'm serious. Or there were clauses in McDonald's contracts. You can't leave Burger King to go to McDonald's. Come on. Is there a trade secret about what's inside that patty? No, but I'm serious. I don't know whether you do know. I didn't know till 5 years ago the incredible number of non-compete clauses for ordinary people who is done for one reason, to keep wages low.
Yeah, sorry. So the audio on this is really choppy, but the point he's making, I think, is a valid one, and one of the most important ones that he makes in the whole thing is that non-competition clause. Like, I as an actor, there are rules about me quitting a show and going to work on another show, because you can argue that a network puts a lot of money into the promotion of you as a character. You are literally the face of something. There's jump clauses in commercials. If you're the commercial character in one thing, you can't just jump to another competitor because it mucks up their entire advertising scheme. You can understand that. That makes sense to me. And because it's your face, your image, your personage is an integral part of the company's face to the world, right? That's not the case in most of these folks that he's talking about. They are simply, the forgettable workers from the CEO's point of view overall. And if they were moving from one restaurant to another, you wouldn't even know they were there, except for the fact that they are a qualified worker who's capable of understanding how that particular space works. And as more of these places, ironically enough, get swallowed up by PepsiCo, and you have, McDonald's and Taco Bell and Arby's and all these things kind of falling under the same envelope. And the irony that if you want to go work at one of those competitors, you still can't, even though the parent company is the same, which is really bizarre. And again, what if the reasoning you want to move is beyond the work aspect of it? That you've been working in the fast food industry, you've been working as a programmer, you've been working in one of these environments, and you simply need to move geographically because of, say, the school district, for example, or because of a sick relative, or because a natural disaster affected your house, or your apartment building, or what have you, and then you need to move someplace. You're going to move nearby, but you don't want to add an hour and a half to your commute, so you're going to work at a place closer. But the McDonald's you work at isn't hiring in that area, but the Taco Bell is, or whatever. And you go, I can get that same kind of job. I know how to do this stuff. I know how to operate the giant machine that Steve Martin talks about that goes, hamburger, malt, here's your change, thanks for coming. You can do that. You should be able to do that. You're a capable worker. You should be able to, take that trade craft anywhere you want, as long as you're not, it's not creating stampedes where people are, sucking the employment base out of another company by jacking up prices to be like, we'll hire all these people at a really high wage and then make them sign a non-competition clause and then fire them, which is what happens. This is spectacular. This element of it is such an important necessity. We got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. It's the House Sparks. Oh, no, it isn't. It's Joe Esposito Show. I'm not on until tomorrow. I got into autopilot. I apologize. This is Joe Esposito Show. I'm just filling in. I'm Hal Sparks. I'll be back right after this. Welcome back. So I'm Hal Sparks, just filling in for Joan. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for joining me. I would be remiss if I didn't remind everybody that one of the ways you can support my show is patreon.com/HalSparks. Support the show. That'd be great at whatever level you can or would like to. If you can't, don't worry about it. Also, if you're live streaming and watching the show right now, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and a like. And always support the show with super chats and subscriptions. That's the way we stay on the air. That's how we become viable, so that I don't have to go away. So that said, okay. So I want to. The audio on the rest of that is equally as terrible. We are under my conspiratorial mind has flipped to that someone's jiggling the cable on purpose, because the economic news is terrible for the Trumpicans, and they're having a really hard time dealing with this. So somebody's back there, Johnny from airplaning with the wiring. The other aspect of there's 72 aspects of this, but one of the big parts of it is that they are cracking down on anti-competitive practices in airline fees. The order is directing the Department of Transportation to consider, which is why Pete Buttigieg is there as well, amongst everybody else, because they're dealing with this as part of their infrastructure focus, requiring airlines to refund fees when baggage is delayed or when the plane's Wi-Fi is broken, according to a fact sheet released by the White House. Biden's executive order signed Friday afternoon also directs the Department of Transportation to consider issuing rules to require clear disclosure of fees for baggage changes and cancellations. Today, airlines are required to refund baggage fees only if the bag is declared missing or lost, I think, or if it has to be delivered, I think. Yeah. Reduced competition contributes to increasing fees like baggage and cancellation fees. These fees are often raised in lockstep, demonstrating a lack of meaningful competitive pressure, and are often hidden from consumers at the point of purchase. The four major commercial airlines control nearly 2/3 of the domestic market. We remain committed to transparency regarding fares and continue to be strong advocates for visibility on government taxes and fees, said the group of airlines. Let's see. In 2016, Obama and the FAA Extension Safety and Security Act required the Department of Transportation to issue regulations requiring airlines to promptly refund baggage fees when a passenger's bag is delayed. The DOT later that year started the process to institute that requirement. However, it stalled in 2017 under President Trump's administration as Trump waged an effort to cut regulations on business. He eliminated. The Trump administration also withdrew proposed regulations on transparency of airline ancillary service fees in December of 2017, saying, quote, "They are of limited public benefit." Yes, they are. The public that makes up the consumers is limited to 85% of the populace. The Delta Airlines declined to comment on it. They said at the time they offer a $50 electronic travel voucher for bags delayed more than 12 hours. It said a refund requirement should be triggered at 24 hours and only apply to domestic flights. No, actually. If your bags don't get there, your bags didn't get there. So if you make people pay extra for bags that didn't get there, then they don't have to pay for where you sent their bag. Sorry. I mean, this is not a situation where, and this is probably the most mind-boggling aspect of this. This is not a situation where all the luggage on a plane went to the wrong city. More than likely, most of the time, it's 1 or 2 or 3 bags that get diverted improperly or something screws up. And everybody else on that flight paid $50 or $40 or an extra $20 or whatever it is to have their bag included in the price of their ticket or as a secondary cost if you fly Frontier, Spirit, or one of these other airlines that makes you directly charges extra for it. And in doing that, they still make a ton of money on that flight, on the bags. Something, by the way, that didn't cost them extra before. It is really kind of meant to be pressured down on people bringing bags in the first place because it saves on fuel costs and lowers the weight of the plane. It discourages people. Like, you used to pay for a bag that was overweight. Now you pay for a bag at all. The idea is that they want people to just bring small carry-ons and focus on that, not bring extra stuff. So all that extra weight, it shaves about, half a percentage point off of their fees for the year, which to them is millions of dollars. It makes sense to make that argument. But when it comes to refunding someone's lost baggage, if it's not there when you get off your plane and it's gone, then what you paid for was your bag getting there on time. It is not the same as you only get a refund if you're they divert flights all the time. They give you a voucher, for example, if your flight is delayed and you end up having to stay overnight. A voucher for another flight will often happen, even if you end up flying again on another flight the next morning. It's not that far out to extend this to bags or whatever. And again, this is not enormous in its singular usage. As a matter of fact, affects business travelers in a positive way more than almost anybody else. But just the fact that you would want to you chip it away. This is like if there's death by 1,000 cuts that's happening to the consumer at any given point, this is like healing by 1,000 stitches. Just stitch up the holes in these problems as you go. This is where I would argue that oftentimes government needs more gardeners than fighters. Everybody wants to be a fighter. Everybody wants to talk about fight language. Fighting for you and fighting for this, and I'll fight for that and fight. And the reality is, you're a constant gardener. You're a person who has to make sure there's as few weeds as possible, make sure you can tell the difference between a plant and a weed, and make sure you flourish the biggest array and positive growth of the biggest array of plants and the most positive growth you can in the garden all the time. That's governance. That's representative governance. It's not fighting. Sometimes it requires that, but most times not. Nobody, and you could say, well, we fight weeds. Do you really? Do you really? I know weed killer companies that often, poison the aquifers of our great country and many others will often refer to their weed killers as fighters and killers and that kind of stuff. But are they really? No. They're just targeting towards one particular plant that isn't helpful. And so this languaging around it is so battered and unused in its own, and sort of battered and worthless in its own right, that we don't actually focus on these kind of wins, these kind of regular positive growth, the normalcy of governance. So I think this particular, I've been a fan so far of the vast majority of the executive orders that Biden and the administration have put forward. This one in particular, I'm a big fan of. I think it's about time. And the irony is that a lot of this is stuff that Trump himself bragged about doing while he was in office, or patted himself on the back for having already done, which he did not do. And now, you watch, tonight, Fox News and all throughout the weekend will be complaining that Biden is overreaching and destroying the American economy, and this is socialism and yada, yada, yada. You will hear that. You will hear that this normal pro-competitive clausing, and regulation is anti-competitive ultimately, and is just there to destroy industry. When in reality, the companies that are doing most of this stuff that he's addressing are multinational corporations. Many of them without even, a tax office, a tax base in the United States. Hi, Ireland. We see you. We love you. But still. And many of them have different strategies for dealing with workers in different countries all over the world based on how they can maximize profit and push down on the competition in these prospective countries. And the countries themselves have a right to decide whether or not that's good for their citizenry or not. Whether that's beneficial. If a company with its main corporate office in Ireland or Dubai or the Cayman Islands or Switzerland can decide can pretend to be an American company and spend the vast majority of its time maximizing profits that happen in another country under a different tax base and undermine the wealth creating ability of the American populace at the same time. That sounds like a foreign attack on your economy ultimately. And it would be hard to see a lot of these gigantic corporations, the multinationals,
break.
As national as nation states of their very own. We got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. I'm Hal Sparks, filling in on the Joan Esposito show. We'll be back right after the news. So the executive order, the White House put out a fact sheet about the executive order, and there's some fascinating stuff in it. The antitrust aspect of it, which is something you hear a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth from the Republicans about, but doesn't actually amount to, nothing they ever did actually amounted to solving any of that stuff. One of the things that they address is they call on leading antitrust agencies, the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission, to enforce the antitrust laws vigorously and recognize that the law allows them to challenge prior bad mergers that past administrations did not previously challenge. That's fascinating. That part of it where they might get another bite at the apple when a larger company scooped up a smaller company. Now, a lot of people, the one that stands out in the social media world, of course, is the acquisition of Instagram by Facebook and the acquisition of YouTube by Google. Do I think there's a chance that the YouTube Google thing will be separated? Probably not. But in the case of Facebook and Instagram, they are both social media networks. So it can be seen as them swallowing up a smaller social media network and absorbing it. That will be a curious, take. We'll see if they actually, go in that direction. They announced a policy that enforcement should focus in particularly on labor markets, agricultural markets, healthcare markets, which includes prescription drugs, hospital consolidation and insurance, and the tech sector. And it establishes a White House Competition Council led by the director of the National Economic Council to monitor progress on finalizing the initiatives in the order and to coordinate the federal government's response to the rising power of large corporations in the economy. The president is encouraging the FTC to ban or limit non-compete agreements, encourages the FTC to ban unnecessary occupational licensing restrictions that impede economic mobility, encourages the FTC and DOJ to strengthen antitrust guidance to prevent employers from collaborating to suppress wages or reduce benefits by sharing wage and benefit information with one another. And then there's a whole chunk on healthcare where he directs the FDA to work with states and tribes to safely import prescription drugs from Canada. The president mentioned that. Directs the Health and Human Services Administration to increase support for generic and biosimilar drugs, which provide low-cost options for patients. Directs HHS to issue a comprehensive plan within 45 days to combat high prescription drug prices and price gouging. Encourages the FTC to ban, quote, pay for delay and similar agreements by rule. That's a fascinating thing. We'll break that out into another piece. There's a whole section on hearing aids that they will be, within 120 days, they will have a plan to allow them to be sold over the counter. And this is, by the way, to some degree, no different than you can now buy readers, the glasses that you would get used, as reading glasses, on racks in CVS and Walgreens. Something that, by the way, used to, that was a trip to the doctor. You couldn't just test out what worked for you. You couldn't know what your number was and get them from, Walgreens or someplace. You had to go to an ophthalmologist or a lens crafters kind of a store with a prescription and those kind of things. Now it's pretty normal. It's a fairly normal thing. Now the same thing should apply in many ways to, I also think like wrist braces and knee braces and those kind of things. You can buy, obviously the high-end ones that are prescribed you by an orthopedic surgeon or something like that, they might direct you to get a specific one. But if it's run-of-the-mill recurring joint problems, you can get something that will help you at a regular pharmacy. If it doesn't do enough, you can go see your doctor and they can give you something that will help you more, but that's available to you. Why is that available in reader glasses but not hearing aids at certain levels? So that in and of itself is going to look for that to become more of the norm as well. They're going to standardize a plan for options in the national healthcare insurance marketplace so people can comparison shop more easily. And there's stuff like I mentioned before on the airlines. This is a very comprehensive, strategy for increasing competition in the United States, all of which Trump could have done, none of which he did. The commission to look into why is very different from a commission to come up with a plan to. There's an interesting, not just a distinction between, how the Biden administration views there should be a solution to this problem, but the fact that they are actually ordering a solution at all. I can't stress strongly enough, in the complaints about the Paris Climate Accord, for example, the Trump administration and all the right-wing talkers talk about how America's going to lose trillions of dollars in money and in jobs, and it's going to destroy our economy, all while ascending China and India because they have none of the restrictions. Never mind the fact that in the Paris Climate Accord, every single paragraph has an out about do the best you can, don't wreck your economy doing this, but we'll all try to take the best steps we possibly can to get, and these are our goals. If we can get these goals without wrecking our economy or destroying our labor force, that's what we'll do. If it would destroy your labor force or wreck your economy, then obviously you don't do it. It's that kind of flexibility in the treaty. The same thing is true of what the orders, of what Trump's idea of the irony is he's against that, but in all of his executive orders, this was like, we're going to set up a commission to look into why this isn't happening. Because we want it to happen, but we're going to look into why it's not happening. There's no part into look into why it's happening and then give me a plan to make it happen, incorporating all that information in the next, 120 days. It was always look into why. That was the news story. That was the entirety of the effort. Whereas the Biden administration is saying, look into why, and then fix the why. Come up with a plan so we can implement this, and it's got a shelf life. You've got 45 days, you've got 120 days for each of these. By the way, thanks very much, people in the chat room, for reminding me. Don't forget to give a thumbs up and a like and subscribe to the show. Infotainmentwars.com is, of course, how you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. Every little bit helps if you're into the progressive and liberal talk world on YouTube at all. That we are ice skating uphill against right-wing dominance on a lot of these platforms. As much as they decry that they're being censored and kicked off, they have an outsized control of the algorithm, and they absolutely get boosted far more than myself or Stephanie Miller or Tom Hartman or any of the other talkers, even David Pakman and others. It's hard for us to even crest into that zone because of that dominance. So every little bit helps. If you're so inclined, infotainmentwars.com, like and subscribe to the channel. That would be really helpful.